Hello, everyone. Welcome to Power Hour. My name is Monica Sikora, and I have a huge privilege today to welcome one of the best trainers, or should I say even movement specialists, that I have ever worked with in my entire career, Nella Hurst.
Hi, thank you.
Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really excited to have you here because I think there's a lot of questions I have for you, and I think it will be really incredible if we can share that knowledge with the rest of our audience. Nala, first of all, explain to us what is that you do at Perfect Balance, and why are you here?
Why am I here? My life's journey. So I'm here with Perfect Balance. I'm a personal trainer and a movement specialist. So essentially what that is I just get people moving a lot better in their own bodies, not, by the norms of other people, but how they can move freely with no pain, so pain-free, and with freedom in their bodies. So I just get them moving really, really well. And it just complements a lot of the treatments that we do at Perfect Balance with the osteos and the physios that we have, which are a fabulous team, by the way.
And I guess it would be a huge mistake not to mention one of the main reasons why I was so excited to speak to you today, your hugely popular mobility services. Can you tell us a little bit about what are the mobility classes and what are they tailored for? So who would benefit from them? What is the philosophy behind that?
So the mobility classes are designed for a wider range of people. We do have more specialist classes given the demographic of clients that we have at Perfect Balance. But essentially, a mobility class bridges the gap between coming out of treatment, so coming out of injury, and it's not just for injured people, everyone can benefit, but it bridges that gap between injury prevention and performance of body and performance of movement. So it's a really, really good way to learn body control in the joints, which the joints are very, very strongly associated with our nervous system. So it communicates to our brain very well. And they're designed to improve the performance and resiliency of our joints, and thus our control in our bodies, and thus the freedom of movement in our bodies. So when we've got more range that we can explore in our joints and safely, then the brain will start to associate that movement with being safe. So then pain reduction will decrease as well. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it does. I think the main reason why I want to explain that to people is I want to avoid the confusion with other services like yoga or stretching. So actually, certain stretches are a part of your classes, but it's not only about stretching, is it? There's many other components. So what are the main components that you include in the workouts when you work on the mobility with people?
So just to touch on that note of the difference between sort of Pilates and yoga and then our mobility classes, is one of the, I guess there's a really simple formula that we can use when it comes to mobility, and it's strength plus flexibility is your mobility. So that's essentially the range of motion that you can control and that you have the strength to control. That is mobility, essentially. That's kind of the term for it. So the difference with it, yoga is incredible. I love practicing yoga myself, but a lot of it is sitting into a passive stretch where we're using the breath to release tension into the body and allow those tissues and the connective tissue and all of our muscles to relax and open up. But we're kind of using breath and gravity to do that job for us. We're not really using the nervous system. So it feels lovely, but it doesn't necessarily build strength or control in those sort of end ranges, those nice big hamstring stretches that we get, or those glute releases that we get in yoga. And similar with Pilates, a lot of Pilates is fundamental, it's fabulous for work of the creating control in the core, creating control in our pelvis area and our lower backs, and a lot of us get sort of pain and tightness in those areas. But a lot of it is mat-based. So again, we want to start exploring, well, actually, when I start moving my body in bigger ranges, which every single day we're getting up and down from the floor, we're reaching for things, we're twisting, we're bending. So how can I move safely in those expanded ranges with control? So essentially they're the kind of things that we look for in the class, is how can we go beyond just lying on a mat? How can we start to move our bodies a little bit more dynamically, but with control? we always do a little bit of core. So actually, like, the core that we do in the classes is very Pilates and mat based, just to go through, come back to that centered approach of breath, core, control, and then we make the movements bigger and more dynamic after that.
That's yeah, couldn't put it better myself. Thank you. I think it's worth also noting, although I know that you yourself have a privilege to work with certain athletes and stunt performance during your mobility classes. I think it's worth noting that those services are not only tailored for people that are advanced, but they could also be extremely beneficial for people that have fairly restricted mobility, and it's just the intensity of those classes that will need to be adapted for those people. Would you say that a person with a highly restricted mobility would benefit of those, or would it be better to start maybe on a one-to-one basis in those cases? What's your view on that?
I think depending on how much awareness somebody has, I would normally say, okay, I think one-to-one guidance would be more beneficial for you. People with restricted mobility, if we have a class that's centered towards that, where you're really breaking it down and just taking it step by step and the intensity is much lower grade, then absolutely they can join a class. But it really, I think in those cases, it also, I would then potentially look at that person and go, I think they could really benefit with some one-to-one work just for a few sessions. It's a little bit like Pilates as well. Pilates is fantastic. We can learn so much, but just sometimes we need to get that client just to kind of really check in. Sorry about that. Let me pull you back up again. We're back. I my laptop and then it just started ringing. So where was I on that one?
Do you want to start again?
Going back to Pilates. So the same with Pilates, when you've got a client, sometimes you just need to get them onto the mat and work with them on a one-to-one to really feel like they are activating their core properly before you then go, right, let's unleash onto a class where you've got slightly less control over every single person in the class. And it's the same with that, depending on somebody's mobility restrictions, if they have any. What I do tend to find that even if somebody has, because I've worked with people with like frozen shoulders before, and using this approach, again, because we're really looking at joint control and the nervous system, then when we can start to explore ranges that the body and the brain feel safe in, we can start to open up things like shoulders. So even with people with very, very restricted mobility issues, this is very beneficial for them too, as well as performance, that people that use their bodies in performance a lot, such as athletes and stuntmen and dancers.
That's brilliant. I think I firsthand experienced how much benefit those people of all abilities are actually getting from your classes, and how much more of the education they're getting, which I think is such a key component of the classes that you lead. And it's brilliant to watch people being truly empowered by that knowledge and taking everything that you say on board and incorporating that, whether that is in their weekly routine or pretty much day-to-day activities, because this is where the bad habits creep out, isn't it? It's not so much the controlled environment always of the workouts, it's the way we sit, the way we stand, the positioning of various parts of our body as we perform the day-to-day activity. So I think there is no price we can put on how much value you give into all the people joining your mobility classes. And I think on behalf of them, I can thank you for that. It's brilliant. It's really making a difference to a lot of people that we see in the clinic. So I guess the question, Natalie, is if someone is injured, or should I say, is if they're during the process of a rehabilitation, is it best to start putting the mobility work, or would you say that they should wait a little bit longer before starting the mobility work? Where does the mobility sit in that rehabilitation process?
Personally, you can start and there's a bit of reading going on. I've noticed one of the approaches that we tend to take in the mobility classes is the type of contraction in the body. So that if you think about, I'm going to break this down into a lot of people. If you think about a contraction, so I'm taking my arm and I'm creating a contraction in this muscle here. There's 3 elements of contractions that we make when we take that arm towards our shoulder and away, or take the hand away from the shoulder. And this is the contraction part of it, where the muscle gets shorter. The bit where you're flexing like the thigh is the isometric part. So there's a muscle contraction, but there's no actual movement of the muscle and thus the tendons. And then lastly, you've got the lengthening part of the muscle, which is called the eccentric. Now, what we tend to focus on in the classes is more isometric work. And what that's really good for, and it's been shown time and time again with studies, is that it's the lowest dose of, it doesn't create an inflammatory response in the body. So if you're experiencing pain or injury, the last thing you want is movements that can create more inflammation in the body, because your body's already in quite a sort of high like activity, high tense state, and there's probably a lot more pain and inflammation in the body. So you want to do stuff that's going to create the lowest amount of inflammation, which is where isometric training is really good, because you can start to train the muscles, but you're not promoting any sort of inflammatory response. And by doing that, again, you're then telling the brain and the body, oh, actually, it's quite safe to be in this position. I can start to move movement safely without pain. So for people with injuries, it's brilliant. Again, depending on the injury, I might look at that and go, you know what, we could really do some one-to-one work. So I can look at you and really pay close attention to how you're moving your body. And then sometimes it might work better in a small class environment. So again, I would take a big injury sort of case-by-case approach, but you can definitely apply this technique and this type of training with somebody with injuries.
Yeah, that's absolutely fair. I think that's a key part. So a part of the brilliance of the classes that you're leading is the fact that obviously it started during a lockdown, but continuing outside the lockdown, you are now running them online for people, meaning that we can extend that invitation to people pretty much all over Europe and the world. And I know that you're working with people outside the UK. So tell me, how do you ensure that you give people enough attention in the classes? For anyone who listens to that, who may think, oh, you know, I'm not quite sure whether the online work is for me. How do you go about it in your classes? How do you make sure that everyone gets enough attention?
Well, I think for everyone, how we operate with the classes balance is we always have an assistant. So I'm very lucky. I get Monica assisting classes, which means that I'm still able to facilitate the flow of the class, and we're still able to kind of work with the structure and the programming. But if anybody is really struggling, then there's always somebody that they can go to without sort of disrupting the class per se in online, with our online classes. So they would go to Monica, or they would go to our assistant and go, okay, I'm struggling with this, or it's the opposite way. So the assistant might go, actually, they could really do with some help. Hey, how about you try it this way? How about you try it that way? So there's some great interaction there, and there's eyes are on everybody. So nobody's sort of left out in that perspective, which is one thing I absolutely love about these classes.
Yeah, that's it's very true. I, as a person observing your classes, I'm always amazed how well you control the group and how much of the attention you give to every person. So I feel even in a group scenario, everyone gets that individual attention, and no no mistakes go missing.
Something I love about we get a lot of regulars. You know, we still get new people coming sort of week on, week off. But with the regulars, you start to see how they move. So it's almost like you're building that relationship and that rapport with each person. So each week you're kind of seeing their progressions, and that's a really nice thing. And then when you get to know them by first name basis, and their pets and their kids and all these wonderful things. And this is all just been generated by the online classes. I've never met these people face to face before. But it's really nice seeing that rapport being built and their improvements week by week in the classes too. So I love that.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure people love that too, based on the feedback that we're getting. It's great to see that service being such a huge part of people's lives. I guess the one other thing I wanted to ask you, especially especially thinking of the people that you've worked with during the lockdown previously and now when we're easing out of the lockdown, what are some of the differences that you see, some of the results that you're seeing in the classes? So what tangible results are people reporting back to you due to working on their mobility with yourself?
The first one is like, so everybody's always got niggles here and there, namely like the big ones tend to be the lower back, the shoulder and the knee. A lot of people don't experience hip pain. It's quite a rarity, but you do tend to get a lot of hip restrictions, and often the pain is then symptomized somewhere else, so probably the knee or the lower back. So by working on big joints in these classes, so we do tend to do a lot of work on the hips and a lot of work on the shoulders, then everything else kind of starts to fall into place from there, because these are all like fundamental big joints that we work and operate from. But yeah, the biggest thing that I hear is my shoulder pain's like definitely going down. I don't feel I can move it so much better. My hips, I can get much deeper in my squat position. I can hold the bottom of the squat position a lot better. These are for people that are weightlift and do sort of bigger weight squats. Knee pain goes down as well, because we do a lot of sort of strengthening around the knees. So yeah, that is the biggest one, is pain management, so reduction of pain. And then the second one is that increase in range of motion, where they can get out of positions, get into positions with control, which is two of the biggest things that we're trying to work on. So
I think this wraps up beautifully with the philosophy of the clinic, where we don't only try to get rid of people's pains and don't really start their journey with the end of the treatment. We're trying to make sure that they go beyond just getting rid of the pain and making sure that they understand how that pain occurred in the first place and how can they prevent that pain from coming back or getting pains in any other areas of their body. And I think this is such a crucial aspect that not everyone always thinks about when they come into the clinics. And they come in with a shoulder pain, they come in with a restricted movement. There's obviously the relief they're getting from the treatment, but then there's this huge chunk of education that's missing to make sure that although we love them, we don't see them in the clinic very often again, or at least not with the same reoccurring injury. So I think that's the hugely important part that hopefully stands out to people when they join your classes and they come to the clinics, as that I think is invaluable.
Just to kind of add on, it's something that we talk about a lot behind our team meetings, is we're always trying to give our clients that autonomy and that the ability to be able to make decisions for themselves when it comes to moving their body freely and safely. So not only do our therapists try to sort of work that type of strategy with their patients, but also in our classes, I'm really passionate about trying to educate the whys without kind of getting too fancy and too heavy. But ultimately, you want people to walk away going, I could do that myself really safely. I feel safe being able to expand this, and I know why I'm struggling with this, and I know why I'm struggling with that. Because then you're able to make, the more educated you are, you can make better decisions for yourself, rather than not knowing. And when we don't know, we become, I guess, more scared of moving our bodies, because it's that fear of the unknown. It's that fear of potentially moving and injuring ourselves. So the more we know, the more we can make a better choice, a more informed choice as to how to move it, and actually the whys behind why we might get pain, why we don't get pain.
That's brilliant. And I think it's the perfect way to finish our conversation tonight. Thank you so much for joining me. Just to summarize it for all our viewers today, I think it's very important that we understand that the mobility and the control of the movement comes in handy pretty much at any stage of your life, at any ability that you have with whatever profession that you do. It's equally as beneficial for people sat at the desk all day as it is for people doing extreme sport or like some of your clients, stunt performers. It is something that not only helps you stay clear of any form of injuries or pains, but also educates you greatly on how you should be moving and optimizing that movement in order to avoid any problems and actually perform better if that's what you're after. So I think if I can only say one thing, is that I think that everyone should at least try the mobility work in their life and see what difference it makes in their day-to-day life and in their performance. So thank you very much for joining me, Natalie, and I hope to have you here soon again.
Thank you, Monica. And any audience to
Brilliant. Any questions from our audience, please feel free to leave them in our comment section. We'll get back to you as soon as possible. Have a great evening, guys.
Thank you.